Hello, everybody. Back from snack, custards and flans and choco flan and oh my God. It's a good thing I didn't go to the fourth floor. So we're going to get into the session now. The session title that was in the program, we didn't write. And but it's descriptive. What we're going to talk about today is the fact that as a museum, the BIPOC museum, that is a community museum, we are going to talk about a process that we use in both our exhibition development and educational development. It's a community-based process that started almost 30 years ago. And it was started at a time when the museum was looking to figure out how to center community even more. And it had expanded in its scope to be a Pan-Asian American museum. So we're going to talk about putting racial justice and social justice into practice the way we do it on a regular basis. And the Wing Luke Museum, for those outside of the Seattle area, has a reputation for not pulling punches, but doing it in a way that is inviting, challenging, provocative, my favorite word, with the result of visitors of any age, general public to students who come back to us year after year, commenting on the fact that they learned so much last time and they can't wait to learn more. And that's not me bragging. That's not me doing it. That is 57 years of a museum trying to learn on a daily basis how to center these things in a way that people can relate and take action. So we are just calling it a community-based programming workshop, but it really is community-based exhibition design and community-based educational design. I'm joined by my coworker, Jessica, and you can see Jessica and Rahul all over the place. But I wanted to go over the agenda. We're going to do, we'll count this as introductions, but the overview is go over the agenda and discuss the different phases of the process. We are going to jump into a museum overview. I want you all to understand the institution in which we work. And then Jessica is going to take us through the community advisory process, which was developed decades ago and that she steers today. We'll talk about where the community-based process connects with other departments, because it's not just education, it's not just exhibitions, it's all sorts of programming. Then we're going to look at, Jessica's going to look at the Resistors exhibition that just came down a few months ago that was designed with solidarity in mind. And it was designed to expand the understanding of how and when people stand up for themselves and resist oppression, but also where they stand up and resist oppression of others, and the legacy that comes from the Japanese American experience in particular. Then we'll do some questions. I just realized that the education thing, this one? Oh, you put me after the break? Oh my God. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the education process and the development of the Resistors script. So in terms of workshopping today, you all are going to work through our community-based process, modeling it, and then we're going to work on developing a script. You all were asked to come with a project in mind or an exhibition in mind or an educational program that you wanted to develop. Did everyone get that email? All right. Okay. We're going to forgive everybody. This whole convening was an incredible endeavor. I'm not going to hold anyone about that, but we'll just get you guys to think through things as we get to that part. Then we're going to go through the second part, and that's the workshopping section, right? I want to tell you about our museum. We are named for Wing Chong Luke, who came over as an immigrant from Guangdong in China. He grew up in a part of the city that was redlined later on, but it was segregated prior to redlining, which meant he lived in a white European American neighborhood, and they were the only Chinese family in that part of the city. He was a pretty amazing guy. I'm not into hero worship, but I think I would have really loved to have met him. He was unique in a time in Seattle that was incredibly racist, where 2/3 of the city voted to keep segregation in place in the 1960s. As he, as a city council member, first POC to ever be on the city council of Seattle, he starts pushing for equal rights, equal housing, historic preservation, and a whole other slew of ideas and ideals that grounded people in their own spaces they created, right? He passed away at the age of 40. The memorial fund that was chipped in by, one thing I should say is the city council race, he won in a landslide. And that is because of his work with African Americans, with other Asian Americans, with white European Americans. And that coalition of people elected him like 60,000 votes or something. It was huge, huge for Seattle. But those same individuals chipped in money to find his remains, which became a memorial fund. And he died in a plane crash. And when they found him, the leftover money was used to create the Wing Luke Memorial Museum. And that's where we come from. We're located in the heart of Seattle's Chinatown International District. This was the first Japantown of Seattle, the third Chinatown of Seattle. And now it is it's the home of Little Saigon, Chinatown, and Japantown. Now, the thing about our neighborhood is that it was always integrated. Y'all, this is where they shoved everybody. Poor white, you're down there. Poor black, you're down there. You're black in general, you're down there. You're Catholic, you're down there. So basically your Irish, Italians, and Germans got stuck living with us too. But that created a really unique environment that carries on to today in the organizing, community organizing, and social justice work of Seattle. I moved to Seattle from Dallas eventually, but I always wanted to wind up there because I had already studied as a burgeoning community organizer in Dallas where solidarity was the goal, and Seattle was that place. So I chose Seattle for the type of organizing work, right? We're the only museum dedicated to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander experience in a pan-ethnic setting. We moved into this building in 2008. When I first encountered the museum was in 1995. It was the first place I ever applied for a job. I didn't get a job. I didn't get an interview at that time. But several years, decades later, I came on, and I've been there for 10 years in my position. Our mission, we connect everyone to the dynamic history, cultures, and art of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders through vivid storytelling and inspiring experiences to advance racial and social equity. What we had talked about doing was letting you know the staff wanted justice, not equity. And we fought the board, and we argued, and we lost. So we wound up with racial and social equity rather than racial and social justice. But in terms of the staff, we know where we stand, right? Equity is important. It's an aspect of justice, right? So the museum today, we have historic spaces that have been preserved in situ. So we have not done renovations. We have not gone back to a particular time. We allow the canvas of those historic spaces to speak for themselves. It gives us a chance to do a lot of things, including talk about one story that I heard from an old friend of ours, Donnie Chin, who let me know that he once went in running gambling numbers, which was very common in our neighborhood, running numbers from building to building, and he saw someone with a Dayglow Jimi Hendrix poster in his room. So how do you tell the story of Asian America without talking about Jimi Hendrix? But that makes sense to me, right? And if we had redone and taken us back to 1910, I wouldn't be able to tell that story the same way. The canvas would be too locked in place. So it's pretty powerful. We have, I think, 13 exhibition spaces. Isn't that right? Yes, 13 exhibition. 6 temporary. Yes, 6 temporary. We have community and youth programming that comes out of my department and Jessica's department. And usually that entails a step up and a mentoring opportunity for us to go from summer camp to a tweener program to a youth program that extends beyond high school graduation. And that gives us an opportunity to raise up more individuals who are interested in history and art and culture, but it's also to give them leadership skills that they can apply in other places. We have no museum cafe because our neighborhood is, it's got so many restaurants, it's got so much food, and there's no reason that we should compete with the community in which we're in. So we have no cafe. And in terms of our economic presence in the neighborhood, we are the second largest economic draw and economic driver in the Seattle Chinatown International District. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. Oh, also, I make noises. We'll just call it FX.
All right. Thanks, Rahul. And that's a great foundation setting for our museum and our organization. And I'm going to share a little bit about our community-based exhibition model that we've been using for the past 30 years or so at the Wing Luke Museum. But first, I wanted to speak to our museum's values. Actually, values came up in our conversation circle earlier this morning. And I will say that these are values that came, maybe 30 years ago when we started doing this more community-based work, and they're still resonant and still valuable to us today. We have them. We have a copy of our values printed out and taped up in our boardroom. So we still refer to these, and these values guide all of the community-based work that we do on a daily basis. Before I mention the values, I do want to point to the materials on your tables. So we have brought with us, especially the book on the bottom, the blue book that we affectionately refer to it as our blue book, which is actually officially titled our community-based exhibition development booklet. But those are all for you to take home with you. And the blue book especially goes into a really deep dive about how we do the work that we do in developing community-based exhibitions. So hopefully that will be a helpful resource for you all in thinking about this work. If that's something you want to pursue at your organizations, you're all here, so I'm guessing that that's something that's of interest. But anyway, I'm rambling. Going back to our museum's values. First and foremost, people give us meaning and purpose. We like to say that we are a museum of stories, and without our community members, we would not exist. We don't have curators at our museum. We do have exhibition staff, and we're more, we would say, organizers and facilitators more than curators. Really, the community members, our community, are our curators. And kind of building on that, relationships are our foundation, whether that's working directly with volunteers or interns, community members who are helping develop exhibits with us, our staff, our visitors are very much intergenerational visitors. All of that builds into the work that we do and is at our foundation. Relationships are key. And then the third value, we desire community empowerment and ownership. I think we all know that museums have very much a colonial legacy, and museums have often been the authoritative voice on who is included and who is excluded, whose histories are highlighted and elevated, whose are left out. And for us, what we desire, what we're striving for, is making sure that our community feels empowered to tell their stories on their own terms. Whether that's through those first-person narratives, through their artwork, through the artifacts that are being highlighted. Really, it's about owning those stories and being able to tell them the way they want to tell them. So we do this work knowing that the labor is intensive. Anytime you bring more than just a few voices to the table, it's going to take more work. It's going to take more time. It's going to require more flexibility. So we do our best to make sure that our timelines allow for that flexibility, that we're moving at the speed of trust, that we're not trying to rush a community-based process. And ultimately, I think this is a really powerful sentence. We willingly relinquish control. Kind of like what I was saying, museums have been about control in the past. And for us, it's about giving that control back to the communities that we're serving. So where did this all start? We've been around since 1967 as an organization, over 55 years. And I will say, when we started in the 1960s, there was really this focus on Asian folk art. And it wasn't until the 1990s when Ron Chu came on as our first AAPI executive director that there was a shift from focusing on Asian folk art to really focusing more on community stories and the community experience. I think a lot of that has to do with Ron having a background in community organizing and journalism. But all that to say, there was a really marked shift in the 1990s. So the first exhibition that really used a more community-based approach was an exhibit titled Executive Order 9066, 50 years before and 50 years after. And this was really one of the first times that the Japanese American incarceration was told directly by those who had experienced the incarceration. We had a community advisory committee of, I want to say, over 20 people, with 3 community chairs who led the process, who facilitated the process. And these are some of the community advisory committee members from that original exhibition. And it was wildly successful. I've heard stories that, there were lines wrapped around the block for people to come see this exhibition over 30 years ago. And so ever since that particular exhibition, we've continued to steward this process, 30 years in the making. And it was really a process that was developed directly by our community members. And so we continue to use that for every one of our temporary exhibitions. Rahul mentioned that we have 6 temporary galleries, I should say temporary exhibition spaces that turn over once a year. And so for each of those exhibitions, we bring together a new community advisory committee. And so those community advisory committee members are uniquely tied to whatever topic that we're working on. And I'll step back and say that even in our exhibition proposal process, we invite community members to submit proposals to the museum, and we review them on an annual basis. So we as staff, we bring all of our staff together. So, we'll get 30, 40 of us in a room and review all of these proposals that the community has submitted to us, saying, this topic is really important to me. This is the topic that I want to see you all tackle in your exhibits. It could be something as simple as music through the Asian American Pacific Islander lens, to something specific, like we're going to use as a case study the Resistors exhibition. But all of that to say, even our exhibit schedule, these are ideas that are coming from the community. So at a high level, the process really allows our community members to serve as decision makers. And we're going to go into more detail about what that process looks like. But we are absolutely creating these exhibitions hand in hand with our community advisory committee members. So I know community advisory committee or an advisory committee can look very different at different organizations. Sometimes it's more of an advisory role on content that the museum has created, and then it's more of like a, hey, how does this look? Did we miss anything? But for us, we really do start from the beginning. We develop the content hand in hand. And so that includes exhibit content. That also includes related programming. So any programming that's tied to a specific exhibition, any outreach that's tied to a specific exhibition. And then we also look to our community advisory committee members to connect us with other individuals and organizations. So ultimately, this process allows community voices to shine, especially through our oral histories. Oral histories a really integral part of our exhibitions, and we collect oral histories for all of our shows, art exhibitions, special exhibitions, anywhere in between. Also provides a space for representation and just generally a space for community building. This is a diagram that's directly taken from that blue book, the community-based exhibition model booklet. And I mentioned it was written, maybe I didn't mention this, it was written in 2006. So almost 20 years old. And I would say it's still a really valuable resource that I, to this day, reference myself, having done this work for maybe over 10 years now. I've done 2 different stints at the museum, but it's still a really helpful resource. And it was written by our Deputy Executive Director, Cassie Chin. She really deserves credit for that blue book. But all that to say, this is a diagram that's really at the center of all the work that we do with our community advisory committees throughout our exhibition work. So just really quickly, I include this because it's so important and kind of shows the relational aspects between the Community Advisory Committee and then our staff at the museum. So for each exhibition that we develop, we usually have a Community Advisory Committee of about 10 to 15 people. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It just all kind of depends on the topic, the breadth of folks that you would want at the table, and the scope of the project itself. But 12 to 15 people, that seems to be the sweet spot. And then, like I said, these are the Community Advisory Committee members that are going to be meeting. Sometimes, for the most part, it's monthly that we tend to convene our Community Advisory Committee meetings, but it can change project to project. And they're really the ones that are giving us feedback. So we're doing a lot of facilitation work for those meetings, those monthly meetings. As far as compensation goes, we do provide a stipend for our Community Advisory Committee members. We didn't always. That was something that came about during the pandemic, especially. And we also provide memberships for all of our Community Advisory Committee members. So that way they feel like they can come and experience this exhibition that they were, so integral in creating, and then also bring their loved ones to share in that experience. I mentioned earlier we don't have curators on staff, but rather we have exhibit developers. We have a team of 3, and we each take a lead on different exhibits. Sometimes on larger exhibitions, we'll have multiple exhibit leads and take a more team approach. But we're really there, like I said, to help facilitate the dialogue and brainstorming, and then synthesizing of the information between exhibit Community Advisory Committee meetings. We also bring in our collections manager who helps with loans that are coming in from the community. We have our education team that comes in and also serves on the community advisory committee. We'll often have staff throughout who are either interested in the topic and want to participate. We consider our staff also part of our community members. But then they're also coming in with that, they're wearing a hat specifically from their department. So kind of wearing two hats. Let's see. And then as far as building out the exhibition, we often worked with contractors on exhibit design and text writing. Each exhibit is so different, and we want each exhibit to have its own identity and feel. So we'll often bring in different graphic designers for each exhibit. And then for text writing, we often go back to our community advisory committee and see if there's someone who is interested and maybe has background in writing who would want to be our text writer for this show. So we actually do go back to community members for the text writing for the exhibition. And then this is the kind of meeting by meeting outline. I mentioned that usually we meet monthly, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it depends on your community advisory committee. I know we worked on a food exhibit years ago, and we ended up meeting over several weekends and just kind of combining, like, say, 2 meetings together and meeting for, say, 4 hours, 3 weekends in a row, which was a little intense, but sometimes that just works better for schedules. And so we have this roadmap with the Blue Book, but even within that roadmap, we need to be flexible. So it just depends on the group in creating even a meeting schedule. So with the first meeting, we'll almost always start with just kind of the general project background and the timeline and the role of the community advisory committee. When we're putting together a community advisory committee, we try to find a balance of folks who have participated in past exhibitions, and then those who are maybe new to the museum or just completely new to the process. And so having those veterans participate is always helpful for balancing out folks who are new to the process. But a lot of the first meeting really focuses on brainstorming of messages and themes. So we'll often ask, what would you like visitors to see and engage with in the gallery based on this topic? And what do you want visitors to walk away knowing? So those are often the 2 questions that we ask for our brainstorming sessions. Because we're going to walk through this more deeply in the second part of this workshop in the afternoon, I'm going to kind of breeze through the rest of the meetings, but the rest of the meeting topics, just to get to our case study. But I just wanted to make sure you saw kind of this meeting outline that we're working through main messages and themes together. And then after we prioritize main messages and themes, we begin storyline development. And so again, in between each of these meetings, staff are working on synthesizing that information that's generated. Throughout the whole process, we always make sure to check in to say, hey, this is what we heard. Did I hear this correctly? So making sure that we are not projecting our own ideas into the mix. So that always happens at the beginning of each meeting. So ultimately, we end up with a storyline that really tells the arc of the visitor experience. And then we, towards the end of this meeting series, think about and discuss looking at the atmosphere and feel of the exhibition. A lot of folks don't necessarily come from a design background, but you can definitely reflect on certain spaces and know how you want your visitors to feel. I think everyone has that capability. And so we used to design by committee, which if you have a group of 15 people trying to design anything, that can be very challenging. And so we moved more to this model of brainstorming how you would want things to look. Maybe even like a warm color palette versus a cool color palette, based on if you want a space to be really inviting or something like that. We also wanted to share that there's been this evolution of a community-based model throughout our organization. So it really started with our exhibitions and has over time really expanded into other departments. Rahul is going to talk more about education, but I just wanted to point out that our education staff will almost always have a representative from our education team on the community advisory committee so that they can hear those discussions from our community members. And then those main messages and themes and subsequent discussions really inform our gallery tours. So making sure that there is that connection between the community advisory committee and then what is being shared on our gallery tours. And Rahul can speak a little bit more to this as well. We do have a community advisory committee specifically for curriculum development, made up of educators and other community members to advise on that development too. Let's see, with our community programs department, I mentioned we always have community programs that are tied to specific exhibitions, but then we have general programming as well. But we did receive a grant from IMLS to convene a community advisory committee to look at our offerings more holistically. And so we did have a community advisory committee that supported programming development, even down to our development department. This house party event was really targeted towards cultivating younger donors. Although it's no longer an event that we hold at the museum, when we did start planning for it, the development department did convene a community advisory committee, and it ended up being really successful. Each of the 20 community advisory committee members invited 10 of their friends, and then pretty soon we had a sold out event. And it was because they were so invested in the programming. They were really proud of it. It was a really fun event that we unfortunately, did we stop it during the pandemic? I can't quite remember. We stopped it after the pandemic, and kind of wove it into other existing programs. But I will say when we did host the house party event, it was a really fun event. Okay, so that's kind of the foundational work for our community-based exhibition model. Before I move into this particular case study, are there any questions so far? Yes.
Is there a process for selecting these advisory members?
That's a great question. No, not yet. Or it might be. It might be in the book, but it kind of evolves over time. So we will usually start with our internal exhibitions team. We'll start with a topic. So usually it's about 2 years out, sometimes 3 years out, depending on our timelines. And we'll just brainstorm internally with, amongst the three of us. Like, here's this topic on music, for example. Who do we know in our networks who we've worked with before? And start from there. And then we'll go to our interdepartmental meeting, which is pretty much an all staff meeting, and say, hey, here are the folks that we have already thought about or reached out to, who's missing, and so we're relying on this wider network with our peers. And then it's a multi-layered process. We'll often meet these community advisory committee members, or at least community members we're starting with, maybe meet over coffee or over lunch or over Zoom now as a tool, and say, share about the project and see how they would like to participate, if they have capacity to participate. So sometimes they might not have capacity to be involved in a community advisory committee role, but they, might have a great oral history and story to share, or maybe they have this really great artifact, or could connect us with other folks. So that's usually where we start, and then we kind of cast this wider net. But also trying to balance too, like I said, folks who have participated in the past, folks who haven't. We're always trying to expand our network, our Wing Luke family. And really too, we keep in mind wanting to continue that relationship over time, so that it's not a, hey, you've done your time, you've served on this advisory committee, we never want to talk to you again. Like, we keep folks in mind in building those long-term relationships so that they can be involved in the museum, whether it's on another community advisory committee, maybe it's volunteering in our library or with our collections manager, maybe it's being involved with community programming. So different ways that we can continue that relationship building. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about the stipend. I know it started out as volunteer. How did you come to develop the stipend? How much is it?
Sure. Great question. I would say it's kind of evolved over the pandemic. For years and years and years, it was a lot of the work that was going on at the museum, very grassroots organization, community-based, volunteer-based. But we realized that, these are community members who are sharing their time, their expertise with us. They should be compensated, or at the very least, provided a stipend that can help remove those barriers to participation. So it depending on the project, it's anywhere between $200 and $300, which we recognize is not like an hourly one-to-one ratio for time, but maybe more for, addressing barriers to participation, like travel expenses, childcare costs, those kind of things. And then I think for maybe the last, at least since I returned to the museum almost 6 years ago, we've been offering a museum membership to all of our volunteers, whether or not they're on the community advisory committee or, supporting our auction or other things. So we always try to provide a membership for our volunteers. Some of it was grant funded at first. I can't quite remember if it was the IMLS grant or not, but it was grant funded. Now we have it in our general budget. So that was something that has shifted over time. Yeah.
$200 and $300 for the whole project?
For the whole project. And sometimes folks are able to participate in a couple meetings. Sometimes, they participate in the full 6 meetings. Sometimes they don't want the stipend at all and just want to be considered volunteers. So I know it's not a very high amount, but again, trying to at least address barriers to participation. Yeah. Yes. We'll go. Yeah.
Sorry. So I guess I'm curious, you talk about like the flexibility that's required and the timeline and relinquishing control. And I'm curious how that plays out when it comes to things like setting opening dates and planning events around those opening dates, and sort of how other areas of your staff might have like firm timelines that they need. It sounds like you're planning really far in advance, which is something that we need to get better at, which would maybe help with that process. But just in thinking about like just in terms of like interpretive content and like going through an editing process and a design process and an installation process and like keeping those things on schedule, but also having that flexibility. Yeah. I'm just curious about that.
Sure. And admittedly, sometimes our timelines get really crunched. Like there's what do we call it? Like exhibition dominoes over the pandemic, when, you had to shift things around, and then all of a sudden you have to develop an exhibit in 9 months instead of the 3 years or whatever. So we try to be as flexible as we can. But as far as setting opening dates, that we try to provide flexibility in when the reception will be. So prior to the pandemic, we always had an opening reception on Thursday, the second Thursday from 6 to 9. And we found that that didn't always work for our community members. And so we've tried to provide flexibility, and like maybe we offer that Saturday instead. Like the date of the opening might not, or the opening to the public date might not shift, but the opening reception, we want to make sure that our community members are able to celebrate, because it's really for them. We wouldn't have an exhibit without them. So making sure that they are able to participate. Like, for instance, we just opened an exhibit on elders and aging within our community, and we wanted to make sure that the opening reception was at a time that our elders could join us. So we had it on a Thursday from 4 to 6. Per the request of our community advisory committee. And it was a lot of fun. We had bingo and really great speakers. But all that to say, some dates are firm, like when we when we have an exhibit schedule, we need to open an exhibit to the public, but providing flexibility in the timing for related programming, absolutely. We want to check in with our community advisory committee and make sure that they can join us. Did I answer your full question?
I'm still really interested in internally how that flexibility plays out if something at the beginning of the process takes longer than you anticipated, and how that crunch happens. But maybe you'll talk more about that in the rest of your presentation.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that in the workshop as well. Yes.
Well, this kind of might be a little bit related. I'm curious how big your staff is and how you build in structures to help make the work manageable.
Yeah, so we have a team of 3 exhibit developers, and we are usually opening 6 exhibits a year. So it's been a lot. It's admittedly been a lot. And one of their staff positions is half-time high school youth programming, after-school youth programming, and half exhibit. So it's really 2.5. And finding a sustainable balance with all of that has been challenging. We ended up having to push out some of our exhibits just because it was too much. We were tired. And so now we're looking more at maybe 4 to 5 exhibits a year, making that more manageable for our team until we can get more staffing. Whole staff, we have about 30 full-time and then 20 part-time, so we're right around 50 staff members altogether. Yeah, we had one question over here, and then we'll take your question.
I was just wondering, you have the community advisory committee, so how does it work with your board, if you have a board as well?
Usually, they don't really interface, I will say. Yeah, I think our board is very much on board with our process and believes in the process. Every once in a while, we'll have a board member who might be interested or have experience in a specific topic, but I think they join the community advisory committee knowing their role as a community advisory committee member and not as a board member. So I think they go in knowing that balance themselves. But we really don't have that interface between our community our board trusts our community advisory committee. So yeah, we're lucky in that way. Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering about how you switch over the exhibits. Are they pretty scattered throughout your year? So you're or is it kind of a grand opening and 3 new exhibits? Or?
Yeah, we try to stagger them every 2 or 3 months. Some galleries are a lot larger than others. So we tend to have our biggest opening in October for our special exhibition gallery. And then our smaller exhibits are throughout the year. But usually every 2 to 3 months is when we have an opening. So then we try to stagger who's an exhibit lead and when their openings are, so they're not all at the same time, although sometimes things happen. Yeah. Yes.
This is probably a question for first round slide, but are you all a collecting institution?
Yes, we are. We should add that, and we'll add that into, yeah. We have over 20,000, 25? Higher? 30?
Positions in the last 10 years, I would say.
We might be at 30.
We might be at 30.
Yeah. Archival materials, artifacts, and artwork.
Does your advisory committees get any say on what is collected?
You know, we do have an advisory committee for our art gallery. They haven't been advising on collecting because we don't have an acquisitions fund, but that is something we've talked about with them that they're very passionate about, and for the museum to start an acquisitions fund. Because we definitely we've relied primarily on donations in the past, and so we have definite gaps in, say, specifically our 2D artwork. It's primarily East Asian and male artists, so we have a lot of work to do in filling some gaps there. Yeah. Yes.
I got lost in my own thoughts for a second, so if you answer this already, sorry. Do you have a limit for the number of committees somebody can serve on, just so you don't, just to get different voices in the room and it's not the same voice project after project after project?
Yeah, we try to give folks a break too, because it can be a very intense process. So yeah, we try not to have folks on back-to-back committees. Although, yeah, we will invite folks back, especially if they have a connection to that theme or that topic. But try to stagger it, yeah, or find other ways for them to be involved in the museum outside of exhibit development. Yeah. Okay, yes.
I was just curious, going back to when you all had an advisory committee for sort of like overall programming, and curious how the conversation around like messaging and intent sort of shifted versus when you're looking at a specific exhibition.
I wish I had been there for those conversations, and it's something I should follow up more closely with our community programs staff. They were the ones to lead that particular conversation, but I think it started with where, like, kind of baseline, here are the programs that we are offering now, and then they opened up the conversation to think through maybe more holistically and high level about maybe not main messages and themes, but maybe more overall goals for programming, and then going from expanding our offerings from there. But I will follow up on that. Okay, we'll also have more time for questions as they come from each segment of the presentation this morning, and of course in the afternoon with the workshop. But we wanted to make sure to share specifically a case study, because it's one thing to talk through this kind of idealized roadmap of how these things go, but wanting to share a case study specifically. So our case study is our exhibition, Resistors, A Legacy of Movement from the Japanese American Incarceration. This was an exhibit that was on view a few years ago. So it was in our special exhibition gallery from October 2022 until September 2023. Most of our exhibits are up for 11 months. 10 and a half, 11 months, and then we turn over the gallery. So they do have a pretty long run, which is great because then it gives our community members time to come back to the exhibit, whether or not they were serving on the advisory committee and want to bring, friends and family, or just giving folks an opportunity to see a show. Oftentimes, I personally miss shows all the time because they're only up for 3 months. But I do want to give a shout out to Michaela Woodward, who was the lead exhibit developer on this particular exhibition. She just moved over to the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle, and we miss her. But she did a really wonderful job in facilitating and steering this exhibit development process. But this particular exhibition, it grew out of a graphic novel, which we have copies on the table for you as well, for you to take home and reference. It was titled We Hereby Refuse.
This is only one chapter of the 3-chapter book.
Thank you. Sorry. No. Thanks for that clarification. And So I will say one of our staff members, and then also I think Frank Abe, who wrote the graphic novel, submitted this as a potential exhibit topic. So yeah, that was published in 2021, and specifically the graphic novel highlights stories of 3 different Japanese Americans who resisted their wartime incarceration. And so that kind of became the starting off point for the exhibition specifically. And that's what we had when we started reaching out to Community Advisory Committee members. And so a little bit more about the exhibition. So it started from this graphic novel, and it really grew. It grew into an art exhibition that explored the complexities around resistance during the Japanese American incarceration, which really is an often overlooked aspect of the Japanese incarceration. I don't know if we covered it in that exhibit that I made reference to, the Executive Order 9066 exhibition from the 90s. I'm not sure if we talked about it. So all that to say, that was really the focus of this exhibition. And really the exhibition wove together historical materials, first-person stories, and contemporary artworks by artists from a range of cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So there were Japanese American artists who were highlighted, but the Community Advisory Committee wanted to make sure that we were highlighting other examples of the resistance movements. So that exhibit proposal, starting with the graphic novel, it really grew into something much bigger. And really what came out of the committee conversations was that they wanted to make sure that we were highlighting these connections between this history of injustice and the experiences of other communities that were working to heal from trauma and righting these historic wrongs, dismantling oppressive systems, and envisioning new realities. It's kind of the arc of the exhibition. And so they really wanted to do that and kind of drive home these messages and themes through artists and artwork in the show. A lot of our exhibitions kind of, we find are at this intersection of providing historic context and then showing them within side by side with artists and their work that are exploring these same themes. So for this particular exhibition, we had a CAC, we also call it a CAC. So I might say CAC a lot. We just CAC, Community Advisory Committee. We had 13 members, and they were made up of artists, activists, dancers, community organizers, journalists, and Wing Luke Museum staff. And so that group of 13 folks met over the course of 9 months. And like I said earlier, we really tend to start with these pretty straightforward questions. You know, we have the exhibit topic. Sometimes we have a really fleshed out proposal. Sometimes we have something that's as simple as, you know, a word. Like we did an exhibit on beauty, and that's literally all that the proposal was beauty. But we always start with these pretty straightforward questions. What do you want to see in this exhibit? What do you want visitors to take away? And then this is an example of one of the pieces that was highlighted, the Suitcase Project, which asks if you had to pack up your life in 2 suitcases as Japanese Americans were forced to do, what would you today take with you? And so after asking those 2 questions, what do you want to see in this exhibit? What do you want visitors to see in this exhibit? And what do you want visitors to take away? These were the main messages that came out of those conversations with our Community Advisory Committee members. So first, they wanted to make sure to demonstrate that the response to wartime incarceration of Japanese Americans was complicated and varied. Again, not necessarily an aspect of the Japanese incarceration that's typically highlighted. So usually the narrative is patriotic cooperation, and which is not untrue, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So the first part of the exhibition really provided this context for resistance during World War II, to make sure that we weren't erasing the emotional toll and reinforcing the model minority myth. And so providing these counter narratives with specific examples, starting with the examples from the Resistors graphic novel, and then building out from there. So a lot of that, the first section of the exhibition focused on this historical context. And the second main message, that there was no right way to respond to incarceration. Again, demonstrating the various ways that people did respond, and specifically calling out the wrongs of the government and this particular policy, so that we should focus on criticizing the policy and not necessarily people's individual reactions. The third main message, that the incarceration created long-lasting harm that ripples out through generations, and that really that there were these rifts and conflicts within the Japanese American community, based on different reactions to this experience. And that specifically resistors paid a terrible price. There was a lot of punishment, not only by the government, but also within the community. So people who, quote unquote, cooperated, suffered an emotional toll of shame, silence, and disconnection. The fourth main message is that today many Japanese Americans feel a special responsibility to stand in solidarity with other communities facing injustice to ensure this shameful history is not repeated. And so that's really, I'm going to go into some featured artwork that was selected by a jury for this exhibition that demonstrates this particular main message. But really the second half of the exhibit focused on solidarity, and then also this fifth main message focusing on injustices that continue today, and highlighting artwork that that challenges unjust laws and policies. So not all of our special exhibition gallery exhibits put out a call for art, but it was important for this community advisory committee to use artwork as a way to demonstrate those main messages and themes. So we did put out a call for art, and really we opened it up, and it allowed an opportunity to explore a more complex landscape of resistance, starting with World War II and the incarceration of Japanese Americans, but then looking at the nation as a whole and bringing it to present day. And so connecting the dots between different resistance movements. So I'll share, I think I have a slide for each of these main artists. So we probably had, I want to say we had 10 artists who responded to the call. And then we had 4 artists who were specifically invited to exhibit their artwork based on their topic, the themes of their work. So this first piece was by Naomi Shintani. It's titled Dream Refuge for Children Imprisoned. And it's kind of hard to see in these photos. It's a piece that's a bit more challenging to photograph. But what Naomi had done was she created these cots and drew children on each of the cots in 3 different sections. So one highlights Japanese American children who were forced into incarceration during World War II. She also wanted to highlight children who were impacted by the American Indian children who were impacted and taken away from their families in boarding schools. And then also in the center area, she has, representation of children being separated from their families and loved ones at the border. And so she wanted to show kind of these ties of injustice and impacts on children. Is a really powerful installation. Is one of our anchor exhibitions. And there's also voices of children that are coming up from the ground. It's very, very powerful. This piece is by Aaron Shigaki, To Repair. Aaron wanted to use this piece to talk about reparations. So, there are meager reparations that were awarded to Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. But Aaron has been doing a lot of activist work alongside African Americans to fight for reparations as well. And so making sure to use or show parallels in the fight for reparations for Japanese Americans to continue supporting and working in solidarity for Black Americans. And this piece is by Anita Ali. This photograph in the corner here. Anita, this comes from Anita's series where she wears a red chador. She's a Cambodian American Muslim artist and uses the chador as a central piece to a lot of her work. But this particular photograph was taken the day after Donald Trump had won the election in 2016. And so she stood in Pike Place Market in Seattle with a sign that says, "Ban me." And this was in response to the Muslim ban. Oops, sorry for the text issues here. But this is the fourth featured artist, Inye Wakoma. And this is his piece, Separation Census. So Inye and his family had grown up in the Central District in Seattle, which is a historically Black neighborhood, which more recently has been impacted by gentrification. And so almost all of Inye's family has, because of gentrification, had to move out of the Central District. And so he's using this project to demonstrate the loss of community and familial history, and looking at it through data and almost through like the lens of like this type of research and like research project. So it has different iterations, but this was the installation that was featured in the Resistors exhibition. Okay, so another opportunity for questions. Any questions about this particular case study?
I do have a question about the choosing. We already said you had a jury submission, and you was on the jury that selected that. Was that your community advisory group?
Yep. So usually we'll ask for volunteers, specifically like if folks have a background in art or an interest in participating. Right now we're working on, in a similar way, on an exhibit about taking a journey to the homeland or to the source land, or folks who aren't able to make that journey for various reasons, policy barriers. And so we had, for this upcoming exhibit, we had, I think, 6 folks from the Community Advisory Committee serve on the jury. I think it was similar numbers for this one, so that we didn't have like 15 people on trying to make art selections. Yes?
I was just curious, do you always do a call for art as sort of the main part of the exhibition, or do you ever just sort of take the content that the CAC has created and make, graphic panels or interactives or other kinds of museum?
Yeah, usually we don't always use a call for art for this particular gallery, but it's a model that has been pretty successful. We just opened an exhibit on music in the ANHPI through that lens, and so yeah, that was a more traditional, straightforward, content-wise exhibit where, we used all of the ideas that were generated by the Community Advisory Committee to create an exhibit on music. Yeah, so it just depends on the topic and kind of the direction that the Community Advisory Committee gives us. Yeah. Yes.
During both the process and also after the exhibit opened, both for individuals and community, like what did community care look like?
That is a really great question. Yeah, this was a particularly heavy topic. And I don't know if you want to talk about that as far as gallery tours go as well.
So we're going to talk about it too today, but we developed a gallery tour for this particular exhibition. We don't always. But I will say this, the number of community members who came through whose families experienced the incarceration, or those families who they were silent about the incarceration. The fact that and you'll see this, is that we center the stories coming in. There's an organization called the Densho Project that has gathered so many oral histories of people who lived through the prison camps. We'll use their resources. We will use from our oral history archive, which is hundreds of hours of potential material. So we center those stories first. Then we'll talk the art. Then we'll talk artifact. Then we talk in place. Then so there's an appreciation that we do emphasize the story. So in that sense, we promote healing among the insiders. And in terms of dealing with other people's, other visitors' guilt or emotional, there was a lot of emotional outburst talking about these topics, especially as we got into the area of solidarity. And I think being able to train up my team in facilitating, in kind of care settings, they're not experts in it, but they have some skills in it. And so we try to make sure that they're able to facilitate those moments within dialogue in the exhibitions to facilitate some amount of care. That's all that I can speak to, but yeah.
Okay. I think you're next on.
Next.
Yeah.
Oh, you put I thought it was after the break. Okay, cool.
Oh, we can't take a break.
No.
No, you're right.
No, they don't deserve one. All right, take 5 minutes. But remember, we have to come back before 12:30. So, we have to finish at 12:30. So, please take 5 minutes, come back in 5 minutes. And if you're not here, I'm going to start in 5 minutes. Okay. So, exhibitions is one area. Mine is, of course, the education department. And the process we use is not the process we used when I first started. And I want to talk just briefly about what has changed since I've come on. What used to be the general function of the education department was to provide kind of rote didactic instruction or narration. There was no dialogue. And then through our work with the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, we brought in the arc of dialogue, which is what they present on. Has anyone ever gone through the arc of dialogue workshops? You have. The International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. So we've incorporated dialogue and other dialogic forms in our work. We have stepped up our curriculum development. We are fighting at the state level for a shift in curriculum adoption. We are doing a whole bunch of different areas. Our work also is not strictly to schools, K-12, graduate, undergraduate. We also work with the general public. So we have public-facing tours that are developed with the same process in mind. So we use the same process, whether you're a 7th grader or a 4th grader, as you would with a 55-year-old or 75-year-old. So first and foremost, we attend and participate in the CAC meetings. And the reason for that is it gives us the firsthand opportunity to listen firsthand to the stories that the CAC wants to highlight. And we come in looking for the story points. The story points are our anchors in the development of our script. We then go back and have a meeting in our department. We talk about all the upcoming exhibitions, which ones we can provide guided interpretive experiences for, and we move forward on which ones we're going to develop. We divvy it up. I don't do it alone. I have one of the most, and it's going to be recorded, kick-ass teams. I have 12 people on my team. So out of 50 people in the museum, 12 are in education. Just to give you an idea, during the pandemic, or right before the shutdown, Jessica and I were asked to, of course, consider layoffs and things like that. But then we staged a little coup and told them we're not losing any of our staff. If you lose them, you lose us. And we were able to retool everything. And you saw the picture of the woman, that's Dawn. She's our senior tour manager, holding the gimbal with the cell phone. We developed live virtual guided tours by April 20th of 2020. So we were already providing tours to all those schools who are now homeschooling or, distance learning. So that's the flexibility, is that we can respond very quickly, and we're allowed to respond quickly. And that actually saved our entire team. So the priority of making sure our education staff was available when the pandemic was over was met. What was that? No, that's my your time is up ring. It's exactly my. I'm like, oh shoot. Okay, so we then begin discussions with our Education Advisory Council committee, and I'll go into what exactly we do in that committee in a minute. Once the artifacts, and we usually check in with Jessica's team, we get the list, the inventory of artifacts of the artwork, and we start to understand thematically where the committee is wanting the exhibition to go. So again, it's centering their voices, it's centering their discussions and their recommendations or their prescriptive measures on what and how we should be talking about the subject. Then we develop the script. In order to do that, we listen to dozens or read transcripts of oral histories. We then re-examine the script based on tone, passion, emotion, and also stemming from the emotions we feel coming out of reading those or listening to those oral histories. We want to understand the emotional impact on the population or the emotional impact particular artwork has or particular artifacts have on the retelling of these individual stories. We then align with grade level equivalents, all the standards. We do Common Core, Washington State, and I'm in the process of doing Idaho and Oregon because we've been training teachers regionally now. We then go on a walkthrough with the exhibit developer, and at which point we go, oh gosh, we got that wrong. And then we have to go back and redevelop. Sometimes we get it right. I mean, it's 50-50, but a lot of times you're going to find that you missed points. So we try to build in several points in the process that we can go back and ensure that we are actually doing what we say we're doing and stewarding those stories. And then we train the education team. Now, number 11 is open the floodgates with the education team. Because those 12 individuals each come with their own life experiences. They come with their own voices. They come with their own passions, their own cadence in how they speak, and the rhythm with which they use their words. And we want to encourage them to identify oral histories or stories. Not that our script is there. The script is there, but you'll see it's not a script. It's not telling you what exactly to say when. It's stage directions that are mutable. So you can actually adapt and change that. So what the education CAC does is obviously they bring their own experience with education. But if you notice, I am not just looking for educators. I'm looking for people with a ton of different experience, and who, for example, when I had my first CAC, I had a merchandiser from Banana Republic. That's not a plug, and that's not... but what he brought to the table was we were thinking about redoing some of the rooms in our historic spaces. And I had him go up and just take a look. And he was like, wow, okay, I understand the thinking behind the way this is laid out. But if you want to elicit this kind of emotion, blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm not going to think about that. I'm not a bloody merchandiser. I'm not going to think about, where something is located in the room is going to trigger a particular kind of interest from somebody walking in, right? So I'm willing to listen to bankers and whomever because they're all going to come with that kind of experience. They review our scripts, and they review it based on the themes and the messages that the CAC had developed, and they look through and they scrutinize whether we've done it or not. They then identify gaps. Well, this seems to reach a 7th grade audience, but for Washington State at 4th grade, you're missing the mark completely, right? And so we have to go back and think about how to adapt those scripts. They also evaluate every tour that we've ever developed. They look at obviously the scripts, but then they come on the tours themselves. And they look at the visitor experience, the experience of walking. Are we ADA accessible? They look at all of these elements to ensure that we're doing the best we can. They review the grade level equivalents to let us know if we are not reaching particular age groups. And then they suggest topics to explore on tours. So they're contributing to the any upcoming development of the content, right? And so not all our tours are tied to exhibitions. So we've got exhibitions over here, but then we have all of this other work over here. So they actually go across the board. Now, I landed a few really amazing grants over the last few years. If I can keep it up, I will continue to pay for 6 months worth of time at $750. So I pay my CAC members.
When does this work begin in relation to the development of the agreement?
Usually the conversations begin immediately after somebody joins the CAC meeting. So once one of my team members goes to Jessica's team CAC meeting, they come back with information, then the process begins. So we start fairly early on in conversation, but the final product doesn't always get finished. Sometimes it doesn't get finished until the exhibition is up. So
that downtime where it's being built, and that's when you really can decide how your tour goes. So there's a lot of, is that go time? Is that a little jump?
Yeah. And honestly, the moment we get the exhibition map, right, the map of the room, the layout, everything, what's going in which location, where do the CAC want these kinds of emotions to come through, this particular color palette or other elements that are supposed to elicit a particular thing, we want to reinforce those ideas from them. So we can start that process, and that's sort of go time. So we come back to the resistor's main messages. I'm not going to reread them, but I wanted to put them here in case we needed a slide that was closer than Jessica's to refer to. But here's the script development. It is a spreadsheet. And each section of the exhibition, we start thinking about not just, we've got the messages to deal with. Then we have to deal with the visitor experience. And did you all get an email with a link to a study on visitor experience? Okay, so we'll make sure that everyone gets that, okay? But you're looking at the main messages, but then we have to adapt what we're doing. And every time you adapt, every time there's an iteration again from the source, there's a danger of not capturing the message correctly, overemphasizing particular areas, maybe overstepping in the way we discuss certain things. So what we do is we come up with our own sort of guiding principle. Art can bear witness. And we then discuss, we will come up with leading questions. It's like, does the violence in the images surprise you? Does it jar the expectations of the JAs, being Japanese Americans, as being a good model minority? So we're going to contend with a series of myths and legends that this society places on our peoples, so that we can unpack and unlearn and unteach those misconceptions. So with Art Can Bear Witness, here we have Gene Sugioka, the Post and Strike Rally. He's a former Disney artist. He was an early on Disney artist. After coming back from the war, he worked at Disney. He worked on quite a few films. Then there's Harry Ueno from Minidoka, and I'll actually focus on him in a minute. But he basically was arrested because an individual who was a collaborator that they decided was a collaborator in the camp. He was a member of the Japanese American Citizen League. He got his butt kicked. And so Henry was arrested and imprisoned in the campgrounds as being an instigator or a perpetrator of that. But you can actually watch his oral history and understand how little he had to do with the act of harming that individual. This is an image from, it's Sugimoto, right? Henry Sugimoto. This is an image of Reverend Yamazaki, who was also considered a collaborator. So when we're talking resistance, resistance is not always nonviolent, you know? And I know people in this country like to say that nonviolence is like the moral high ground and everything, but sometimes, I will say it plainly, sometimes violence is what you have in front of you. And if your frustration has gotten to the point where no one seems like an ally, and even the people you trusted, like a reverend, all of a sudden becomes your enemy. Now, I'm not justifying their actions at all, but to understand the mental space that these individuals are experiencing. So Mr. Reverend Yamazaki translated the loyalty questions. Are you all familiar with the loyalty questions? Yes? No? So there were 2 questions asked in like a 55 question survey that they administered to everyone imprisoned in the camps. And the one question, I'm going to mix up the order, but one question was, will you renounce your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? The next was, are you willing to fight and serve in the U.S. Army? And people, the resistors, said, no, 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 I won't renounce my loyalty because I never had any loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. In fact, day after Pearl Harbor, I was at the recruiting office saying, I want to go fight for America. And I was told no because I was the enemy, right? So you thought I was the enemy. You took away my constitutional rights. Forget you. I'm not fighting for you. And so that became the no-no boys, one form of resistance in the camps. But then here we start to get into, where does this connect? Where is the Japanese American community coming to understand its role, not just to protect and defend and focus on themselves? They're also thinking, we're not alone in this. And holy moly, if it happened to us, they're gonna do this to someone else, right? And let me tell you, you know who my heroes were after 9/11? Japanese Americans. I had friends in New York City rounded up after 9/11. I don't know how many of you know that we had our people rounded up almost immediately. They were kept incommunicado. People don't know this. And they're on registries. People don't know this. And part of it is they were immigrants, so they kept their mouths shut. Just like the Japanese Americans who went to the camps, they kept their mouths shut for years because it's humiliating. It's humiliating. So when people on certain news networks, oh, shucks, two of the majors, were talking about how they should reopen camps and shove people like me in them, it was Japanese Americans like this tiny little lady. She was about yay tall. Her name was Fumiko Hayashida. And Fumiko was taken to D.C. and sat down in front of Congress. And have you ever made grandma mad? And especially a grandma who doesn't raise her voice. You know darn well where you stand. And if she is saying, knock it off, what do? So she is one of my heroes. And the truth is, she died at the age of 103 years old. She did not become politically vocal until the age of 60. The year she died, I was 43. That meant that woman spent 43 years, every minute I was alive on this planet, fighting for the rights of others, right? That is the legacy of her experience in those camps. That is a story I want to share in this section where we start to see the formulation of, hey, we're not alone and we're not going to be alone, right? So we move the story forward. And then, you know, you're not the only one, right? You've got Anita Ali, the red chador. And so each of these sections, when you